This is Chill Bill coming at you live from Caterol, introducing another segment of the 10th anniversary celebration of Skylanders Portal Casters. Over to you, Inklander.
Thanks, Chill Bill. For this penultimate segment of the 10th anniversary celebration podcast, we have some of the current crew at Toys for Bob joining us. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is as close to official as the unofficial fan podcast is ever going to get. So it's a real pleasure to have you on. If everyone could go around and say who they are and a little bit about what their role was on the franchise, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lou Studdert. I'm currently creative producer over at Toys for Bob, but way back 10 years ago with Skylanders, I actually started at Activision, started in production as a production coordinator and worked my way on all the different titles with Toys for Bob. So I was actually someone who worked with them down in Santa Monica and worked with them remotely. And I got to work on basically every single Skylanders title that came out, as well as do a whole bunch of silly YouTubery for the games as well.
Hi, my name is Ray West. My current job is lead level designer at Toys for Bob. Back in Skylanders era, for the first game, I was a senior game designer. My claim to fame is they sort of handed me all the weird stuff that required some goofy scripting to do it, like anything that flies and any giant robots were my domain.
In fact, Ray would not let anyone else do any of the giant robot work. That's more how
that probably I was trying to cover up that fact. Thank you, Toby.
We'll wrench it from his cold, dead robot hands.
I'll go next time. Toby Schadt, currently design director at Toys for Bob, was around in the early pre-Spyro's Adventure days where we were trying to figure out what kind of game we were going to make. So I was involved in some of the early prototyping of Spyro's Adventure, and then moved into more of a character design focused role. So working with the team to develop powers for all the Skylanders. So Iway and Paul Ritchie would come up with the concepts for the characters, and then they would give them to us and say, all right, what are they going to do? That was the focus of my work for most of the Skylanders games.
Ooh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I'm Andy Salvo. Currently, I am the lead animator at Toys for Bob, but way back when we started this, I was a senior animator. I started before we started working on Skylanders, so I was also here for the prototyping and planning out and figuring out what the game was going to be. And at that time, I was entirely focused on gameplay animation and filling out some of the questions Toby was talking about. Figuring out what the Skylanders did, how they did it, what they looked like, how they moved around. And I was responsible for quite a few of the original Skylanders in the first game and in Giants. Over the years, I founded the cinematics team at Toys for Bob. We started out very small because we were very limited technically in what we could do in the first couple of games. And then by the end was pretty much a full-fledged cinematic team with outsource and layout artists and you name it. So by the end of my tenure on Skylanders, I was the cinematics lead and was focused entirely on cinematics and didn't get to animate as many Skylanders, which was too bad because that was pretty darn fun.
I'm Daniel Ikeda. I'm currently a senior artist, and I was at the beginning of Skylanders as an artist in general. So I did a lot of the levels and just did random kit bashing, just building things very quickly, and whatever Ray wanted me to make, I'll try to make it. Yeah, it's been great going back and hearing about all these things. I actually had to watch YouTube again to see all the levels. It's been a while.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. So we have some general questions, and we also have some questions specifically for people. So Lou, you're probably, to the fans, the most recognizable face of the franchise, other than, I guess, maybe Paul Ritchie or Eric Hirschberg. So tell us a little bit about what it was like being one of the initial people to reveal the latest Skylanders games at the New York Toy Fair and the press events. And how do you get involved with the Skylanders YouTube channel? How did that come to be?
There are so many stories. Where do I start? So as far as revealing games, absolutely terrifying. It's the most exciting and thrilling thing to be representing all of this passionate work that the team is doing. And at the same time, it's this crazy, highly coordinated, multi-person planned months in advance thing to do. Some of them went off very easily and very successfully. It was great. We shut off the game. And in other times, there's a famous story where I accidentally high-fived someone so hard that I dislocated their shoulder the night before we premiered the game.
Oh my gosh.
I was hoping you'd tell that story, Lou.
Yeah. the night before we were going to present, I think it was Swap Force. We were in New York in like the NASDAQ building, and it's me and my fellow producer, Chris Wilson, and we were going to do the whole presentation. And at the end of it, we always had a team thing where we do like jumping high fives, and it was great because the whole thing was about cooperation and the swapping. And we practiced so many times, and literally the last run through, we do this jumping high five, and Chris comes down and he goes, I can't move my arm. And so we end up having to get his shoulder reinserted and all this crazy stuff. So again, making games is hard and it causes high five trauma. But aside from that, honestly, it was the coolest thing. It was really cool for me because I absolutely loved working with Toys for Bob, working with Vicarious Visions, working with Beanox on these games. And I was living and breathing Skylanders, right? And so everything that I worked on with presenting wasn't really scripted. It was just from my own love of what our teams were making. And so for the presentations and demos, I got really good at doing that because I liked telling the story of all the cool things that the team was coming up with. And that kind of led to us making this YouTube channel, which was really fun because it was just me and the video crew just kind of spitballing of like, what are the cool things that the team's working on right now that we could talk about? And the funny thing also is another behind the scenes story is that I would try and do all of that while also doing my day job of doing production stuff. And so I'd usually try and like reserve a day where it was me and our video crew in an office, and I brought like 8 shirts to switch between so we could film like a month's worth of videos all in a single day. We just would try and do as much stuff as possible. But honestly, all of it came pretty easily just because the fan base was so hungry. I loved our games so much, and there was just so much to talk about that the team was putting into these games. So it was a great time.
Yeah, the passion definitely shows through on the YouTube videos you did.
Thanks.
So we can jump around. Daniel and Ray, tell me a little bit about the level design and the level work for the games, maybe what some of your design influences were and what some of the inspirations were for the designs for levels like Quicksilver Vault and Sunscraper Spire, the ones that really tried to play with color schemes and color theory.
It's hard to talk about it without even going back to the original prototypes for Skylanders. We sort of knew that we wanted to push this whimsical feel, really make it stand out as something that isn't just about all of the games that we were up against at the time. We sort of looked at like, okay, do we want to be more like a gritty, realistic Diablo, or do we want something just totally fun and over the top? So like even in our early prototypes, we were playing, there's a famous level that never actually made it out, Prism Palace, that had just lots of bright colors and lots of reflective ideas and lots of playing with light sources. And it just became the Skylanders aesthetic. Always wanted to get that big moment at the beginning of the level where you see something in the distance that you're going to have to interact with, but also making sure that each of these beat by beat moments flowed well from one to the next and always coming back to that big thing in the distance and saying, I'm going to end this level by tackling that. Like with Quicksilver Vault, that was a fun idea of how can we have these separate areas that all link together using this single dynamic, getting that vault open by going and activating these things and having those beams. I mean, we play with that a lot with Skylanders, even like Stormy Stronghold, having that circular where you're always moving along to activate the next item and then making sure that each one of those beats comes back to something that the player sees that they're making progress on.
To that effect, I mean, like when a lot of the artists get the levels, Ray West and a lot of the other designers basically laid out the path, and not just that, the camera work. So it was really helpful as a level artist to play to the camera. So you'll notice a lot of the interiors are like almost bowl shaped, because we got to make sure it's an interior, but also allow the camera to move freely. And because of those layouts, we were able to sprinkle in things ahead of where you are. Even though you might be feeling like you're going higher up, it's pointing down. So you kind of get a preview of the other areas. And that's what I think was really fun to work with, especially with design and what they wanted to. And if we built something, suddenly there was a whole new layout somewhere else where they wanted to add on using that artwork and stuff. So it was a really great collaborative feeling, especially with all the designers.
So are there any levels or environments that you designed over the years that stand out to you as ones that you're most proud of?
Oh boy, there's so many of them. I'd have to say When it came to the first Skylanders game, I really had a lot of fun putting Crystal Eye Castle together. That was one that was, I think, my first level that I worked on for Skylanders. We were actually helping out other projects, so not all the designers. When we were first working on Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, I remember working on that almost in my spare time. We were budgeted on helping out with Guitar Hero Van Halen or something like that. I'm all like, but I have this great idea. I really want to put it together. So I think that one sticks out to me, just that fun moment where I'm working on something and I'm sort of envisioning how it comes together. So that one really sticks out with me.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a pretty good level. That one's definitely pretty memorable. So I guess still going off of that, what were some of the challenges of continuing to create unique and beautiful worlds as the Skylanders game progressed?
Oh boy. If we're talking about the franchise, some of the stuff that became more difficult. I mean, I'll talk about Jump. When we first started, it was, we sort of.
Pandora's box now.
I know, here we go.
It's early in the talk.
No one wants to talk about this. Yeah, for the first two games, we stuck with it more like a gauntlet, something that the kids could easily pick up and play, adding jumps for that level of complexity. How do you make it so that then if you add jump, that means that we then have to have players that can fall out of the world? And how do you teleport them back in a safe place? So like incremental little things like that. Plus, the further you get into the game, things like adding in the traps or adding in, in Imaginators, adding in the senseis and these layered cool things that if you stand alone, it's great and you can have a lot of fun putting it together. But making a level that feels cohesive, that you're including all of those individual beats without it taking 4 steps. And here's another thing that takes you out of the flow of the level. That's probably something that I think we struggle a lot with as we got further into the franchise. The simplicity of the first couple of games really let the characters and the level flow, feel a lot more cohesive than perhaps the later titles did.
One of the things I always thought was kind of interesting was when we start talking about like revealing a new Skylanders game. If you close your eyes, there's like an image in your mind of what a Skylanders level by default kind of looks like, right? It's the green grass, the blue sky, the kind of chunk of island floating in the sky on the bottom of it. And it's always making sure that almost every game has one of those, because you kind of have to have the archetypal version of it to be able to even talk about, what a Skylanders game like looks like. And so then to have that as your like starting, at least for one of the levels, and then to have to iterate and come up with something new to do with even just that narrow of a focus was a major, major achievement. I think that the team would always try and pull off.
Yeah, I think Soda Springs is a very good example of that.
Oh, yes.
So, Andy, you got to work on the cinematic side of things. Talk to us a little bit about what the process was like working with the level designers and also Alex Ness on the narrative side to try to create a cohesive vision for these cutscenes and to kind of have everything integrate together into the narrative.
Just getting the hard questions right out of the gate. All right. So working with Alex and the level designers was always really interesting because Alex would frequently write a lot of the stories and have it ready pretty early in the process, which is great for planning, but a lot of times the levels don't exactly go to the plan that they had originally. So
almost never, I think.
Okay, I was being diplomatic. So the level designers will have tried an idea that we were shooting for in the planning, and then it'll shift a little bit, or the gameplay conceit will shift a little bit, and the level will change. Which, I mean, Alex had already started writing other things, so we didn't always get back to go like, oh, we've changed something. How do we put these things back together? So that frequently did kind of fall under how does cinematics going to figure this out and like recreate or slap together a thread that you can follow through the level. In some cases, it tracked very easily. In some cases, it was quite difficult, but it was always kind of a balance of like, okay, here's what the level was going to do. Here's what we have story-wise. Here's what the level needs to do to progress. And then here's the overarching story. And so frequently our workflow, I would say in the first couple of games, we didn't have a great workflow for figuring that stuff out. It was pretty much just, how can we make this work? And our tools, cinematic-wise, were fairly limited. Our cinematics were predominantly scripted, which means we were using the TFB tool, which was our engine at the time, to tell a character, walk from here to here, take this long, say this line, and then do this action. Or while you're saying this line, play this animation. And because of the way we were writing stories then, and because we were doing the games in so many different localities, we had a bunch of different languages we need to account for. And at that time, we didn't time lock our audio. So English was 5 seconds, German was 20, you know? And so how do you solve for that? Well, the way we did was we said, Flynn is going to say boom during this line. Hopefully in English and German, it's about the same percentage through the line. And then we used a percentage control to say, do the boom animation at 50% through this dialogue. It doesn't matter what language and how long it is, it's going to go boom here. And I hope we were close the majority of the time. That's the best I can say about that. So that was our tool set for both the original Skylanders and Giants. Giants, we had a little bit more. We could move characters around on individual nodes animated through space. That's why you saw so many Flynn flying into level shots, because once you attached him to his little ship, you could animate him doing whatever he wanted. And it was just trying to find that narrative thread through every level was always a bit of a challenge, but it was also kind of the most fun part. And as we moved into the further games, we would map out the levels and then mark the path, and then mark along the path. We'd say it's cinematic here, enemy intro here, yada, 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 yada. And we would try to lock those in place. So even if the story changed or the level changed, those beats would still happen in order. So they couldn't mess with the flow of the story too much by changing things here and there.
Now, I've got a question for Toby. Can you walk us through a little bit of the process of what it was like trying to figure out which characters were going to get what style of movesets, like melee versus projectile versus lobbing?
Yeah, that's a good question. The funny thing about Skylanders was that the appearance of the toy on the shelf was the primary thing. That was the first focus. So Paul and Iwe fundamentally were trying to make toys that were compelling, and also they wanted to have a cast of characters that looked well-rounded, because we have a lot of different fans that like different things. So there were brawlers, there were cuter characters, there were some that were clearly melee. So unlike, I think, the direction you go in a lot of games, whereas the design informs the art, this was sort of the art informing the design. In one sense, that set of constraints is nice, because if you have to look at a character, or if you get to look at a character first, there are some things that are very clear, like Sonic Boom, for example, has the babies, right? And so obviously the babies have to be one of the moves. So in one sense, a lot of our questions were, or a lot of our design challenges were already answered by what the toy was. In terms of how many melee versus projectile versus, say, lobbers, we wanted to have a good distribution of them. But another interesting thing about making Skylanders is that there was really never any guarantee that the player was going to be playing with any particular Skylander. So you had to make sure that the levels challenges were beatable, no matter, they might be a little easier with the right character, certain enemy setups, but, as you guys know, you've played a lot. You can slog through any level with any set of characters. The one exception being, of course, elemental gates and things of this nature, where we very explicitly said you have to use this class of character. So I guess the real general high level answer is we tried to have a well-rounded set of moves and abilities kind of across the spectrum. We tried to make sure that all characters had strengths and weaknesses, so that no one was the clear choice in every scenario.
Except Drobot. Everyone needs Drobot. Everyone uses
Drobot always wins.
You have to test the levels.
Drobot.
Yeah.
The other thing that, anybody that pays attention to game development might guess this, but another thing that happens within the walls of the studio is that the character design team would create a set of abilities for a character, and then other designers and other people from other disciplines, artists and animators, would play the characters, and then they would walk over and they'd say, you know what, we really would like Drobot to strafe. That's like an example of a move that was added well into the development of that character. It's cool. I think when game development is done right, I think that's the way it works. You get input from people all across the studio, and then, more ideal world, you get input from people outside of your studio too. And through the course of development, we would bring playtesters in too, and sometimes good ideas would come out of those sessions as well.
One of the really neat things as a gameplay animator when it came to working on the Skylanders is there were so many characters that you'd be animating 3 or 4 playable characters, over the span of a couple months. And in most games, you're working on the playable character. That's like what you do. That's like you're animating Spyro or any sort of other like main character. That's your job, like all of it. This is like, okay, this week you're doing Trigger Happy. And then the next week you're working on, I want to call him Pandoran Elite, but his name is
Chop Chop.
Chop Chop. Thank you. We have different names for everybody. And so when I was animating on the original Skylanders, I had Chop Chop, Terrafin, and Trigger Happy all going at the same time.
Is that well known that Trigger Happy was called Golden Cheat?
It was the golden cheat.
I don't think I've heard that.
I've not
Okay,
heard
little
that
inside
before.
baseball. Golden Cheat's original set of moves was he had the jumping, spinning his guns in the air, which I originally animated sort of as a take on Yosemite Sam. But what he would do is he would pull in gold from the enemies that were near him. That would give him money that he could then shoot, and you could.
And he was
run
losing
out
his
of
own money as he shot in the
Right,
original.
you were spending your own money as you were shooting.
Yeah. Mine's
he
blown.
was
I can see it.
He was just too much fun, though. It was really kind of one of those things where the designer and I were very much spitballing back and forth on these ideas. And you had so many of these characters going at once, and the animators could sometimes move a little bit faster than design. If you got one of the character, the look and the rig, you could just start slapping down animation, then go to the designer and go, well, I think he could do this.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things in the game where some of them came from design, some of it came from animation. Sometimes the character artists would go, I think this could work. And it was just amazing to see like how many different fun ideas you could get out of those things.
That's pretty cool.
that's
I'm so
incredible.
disappointed that Trigger Happy didn't end up with that like mana system with the gold.
You know,
It was-
tricky.
he
It's
was
always
pretty
been
unique.
tricky because you don't want to. I think the reason why we ended up not going that direction is because you think a lot of people are going to be upset about having to use their
Spending
money
money.
to kill things. It's a wonderful thing for some people, I think, who can appreciate the kind of gaminess of it. Because the idea was that you could go and collect your bullets too; they wouldn't go away. I think like after the enemy that you killed with the bullets, or at least
Yes,
in my
they
head,
would
that's how
drop
it would
extra
work.
money, I think. But yeah, I
Yeah.
felt like the predominant way of getting more money was the spinning guns.
Yeah.
It was like a golden vortex.
Ghost Roaster was another one that kind of had that same, you lost health when you were using your invulnerability. That one actually we shipped with, and I'm really happy that we did because I think it's cool to have that. Just like life, you have gives and takes.
I think those mechanics are really cool, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess another question for Lou. We asked you about the YouTube stuff and everything, but what were your tasks like as the production coordinator on the Skylanders games?
So, obviously they kind of grew over time. My first initial task, I remember joining the team, and I joined like almost immediately after Skylanders Spyro's Adventure shipped. So people were playing it, but my role when I started, one of the things that I got to do was review all of like the screenshots and videos for the characters coming out for Skylanders Spyro's Adventure after the game came out. Because, you remember, all the characters didn't come out right at the time that the game came out. They came out throughout the year. And so what that meant is that I would work with our marketing department, I would work with our creative kind of services department, and I would help, get great screenshots and help manage them making these videos. And that really started my relationship with those departments, which, eventually led to like YouTube stuff or even helping to manage the Soul Gem videos. A lot of those we actually made in the art services team at Activision and then sent them over to Toys for Bob to include in the game since they were focused mostly on the gameplay or the in-game cinematic. I helped manage and come up with some of the things that we were doing there. Additionally, the fun things of video game production, like tracking legal documents and QA bugs and, various things like that also showed up. And then as things went on, I also helped manage the voiceover process. So helping with the casting, the recording, going to the recording sessions. I'm actually lucky to say I directed a few sessions, which was kind of cool, only in emergency needs, but it was really fun. Yeah, all sorts of things. I mean, the greatest thing about working in production, especially on Skylanders, is that every day is different, right? So one day I could be flying to a far off country to show off the game. The next day I could be back in the office, looking at the number of bugs that need to be made. And then the next day I could be having a conversation of, hey, are we going to get in trouble with the ratings board because this fart sound is too loud? So there's some fun there. I still remember one of my favorite VO moments was I got to go and actually help direct a session with Flynn, Patrick Warburton. So, just like how many booms can you get into a recording session before he's like, yeah, I think you have a boom like that. All right, can we check if we already, I think I did a boom, but no, this boom, you have to direct this boom. This is a sullen boom. This is a sad boom. No, that next one's a really big boom, but it's also hard for him to hear because there's an explosion and there's wind. So could we get and so just all of those kind of added levels of context were really fun.
I had forgotten how obnoxious Flynn was.
Oh yeah. He got more lovable.
In particular.
Yeah. Getting to go to those sessions and meet all the folks. And also like I was the person who was mostly, I don't want to say playing the game, but like I knew our game so well that I would go to these sessions to help provide the context. when reading a script, it's like there's only so much detail you could put in. And so I'd be there going, actually, you're on an airship. There's a space whale over there. And there's another character swimming in a narwhal while you're yelling out for them to watch out about an evil bird, So helping to provide that context was always
Sometimes
fun. So.
At Toys for Bob, we'd be watching a video of a company meeting where Lou would be talking about our game. And I remember early on going, who the heck is this guy? Introducing our game. Why does he think he's the expert? But then as soon as we started listening to him, it was like, wow, he actually knows
more than we do.
and
I
he
know
seems to like it. So after a while, we were like, we're all for that guy. And now he's at Toys for Bob.
One of us.
Now,
But yeah, no, I got to do a whole bunch of random things.
Now you mentioned.
Wait, I also got to help name some stuff, which was really cool. That was always my favorite. Was we'd spend days and days and days coming up with like Excel sheets of possible names, so that way a character wouldn't be Axe Girl or some other fire horse.
They just start as Axe Girl.
I know, right?
Or Golden Sheet.
Golden Sheet was a good name.
So naming and catchphrasing were, I think, my favorite part of every year.
My wife is still bitter that Fire Horse didn't turn out to be Pyro Main.
Oh, that's Trailblazer's pretty good though.
It's not bad. For a second.
There's one thing, Toys for Bob is amazing at pun names. I don't think I've ever seen a better group.
I think that's why I got invited to the studio. Solely dad joke energy.
Lou's good at it, definitely.
Yeah, there's definitely some great Skylanders puns. But you mentioned the voice acting, so I do have to ask, because Paul Ritchie said that he'd done some. Obviously, Alex Ness voiced like half the characters in the game. Has anyone here done any of the voices for any of the characters by chance?
Not that they got released.
Yeah. You have to be a SAG. You have to be a union member. Yeah.
Yeah.
To do it. Now, back in the very old days, early Toys for Bob days, I did voice a penguin for 102 Dalmatians, Puppies to the Rescue, if you want to go way back. You guys are too young to have known that game, probably.
So then voice prints. Did anyone do voice prints for the characters?
I did some scratch audio for just sort of timing out cinematics, because our cinematics were so timing based. I would frequently record scratched, because without an actual audio file, you couldn't run the cinematic, because it was completely reliant on how long those lines were. One of our characters was voiced almost entirely through production by one of my animators, Sue. She did a really great. Lou, help me out with the name of the character.
Oh, gosh.
Mags.
I keep wanting to go. Yes.
Mags.
I always wanted to call her Calamity Jane, because that's the sound we ended up going
that's
with.
basically the voice print we were after. One of my animators is a very talented voice actress, and she voiced her the whole way through production. And we knew we had to switch the voice eventually, because she wasn't SAG actress, but we did eventually find somebody.
Eliza Jane Schneider, I think, was the actress that I remember going to a session with her, and she's hilarious. But yes,
she was really funny, but
amazing.
We went through a lot of different people, and it was that's not like enough like Sue. That's not enough like Sue. Like, it was like, we need to find somebody who sounds like the one that we had in production, which reminds me of something that happens in film a lot. Like, somebody scratches the character in, and then they end up going, well, we can't find anybody better, so we're just going to stick with that. We don't quite have that in games, but this is about as close as we got.
Yeah, I think a lot of us would end up getting some scratch time, at least on the various games. I don't remember if I did the last game or whatever.
Errol,
but Errol did.
Yeah, Errol Otis was the announcer.
too.
The announcer, yeah.
Yeah, Errol did all the announcing voice whole way through.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
When we used to, when we were making the games and we'd talk to our QA teams, Alex would call them at random hours and leave voice messages as different characters, like thanking them. So you'd get, like Chompy Mage just leaving a voicemail for, like the QA department saying thank you for what you're doing. It was the greatest. I don't think you get that on any other game.
Oh my
that's
gosh.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Alex
really
was
great.
doing too, like for so many other TFB games in development, he did almost all the placeholder audio for like the Madagascar games, and then going back even further than that. So I've got these very cherished old prototype versions of our games that are almost exclusively Alex Ness. They're in many ways as good or better than the release version, at least to me.
I always loved his King Julian. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
His King Julian from Madagascar was amazing. I've never worked with anybody else who writes a joke like he does. And it was never the joke you thought it was going to be.
Now, Lou, you made a brief mention about how the Skylanders were released throughout the year. How was it decided which Skylanders were released when in regards to that wave system?
A lot of it had to do, it was a number of things, right? And so some of it had to do with the amount of toys that could be created at the time, right? Because there's so many characters and so much. So that helped determine the size of the waves. and how many of the waves. It's purely the timing of things. The other thing that's always interesting is video games have a very set release schedule of like, it's coming out this day. But with toys, because they're a physical good only, it was always like, it's going to come around this kind of time-ish because it's harder to ship. They're larger objects. And so it actually took longer to get to places. So part of it was figuring out that size amount. Then it was the toy development. So one of the things that's interesting is Skylanders was almost two different teams working in tandem, especially at Activision where I was at the time. There was a team solely devoted to working with Toys for Bob, with our developers on what the game was. And then there was an entire team focused on the toy production. And so that was them working with sculptors. That was them working with, the artists at Toys for Bob and the other developers to come up with the ideas. But then it's also working with the teams who are actually going to be making physical goods, doing testing on making sure, the ankles aren't so narrow that they'd snap off. That's not so sharp that it could hurt someone. And so all of these things. So they had their own development schedule and their own production timeline. And in a lot of cases, it was really, really long where they had to be figuring out these timelines. And so some of it just had to be from, this toy production team wanting to make sure we had a balanced release amount of X number of elements, X number of types of characters, genders, element, style, play, all these different things to make sure that we had a good spread and not too many of the same kind of types of characters all at the same time. So it was a mix of the development team, the toy development team, and marketing to figure out all those waves and kind of how they went. It was very complicated. I was glad I was on the development side of the games.
I have to piggyback on something. And when we're talking about Skylanders development, early on in the process, we have to talk about the fact that at any moment, we expected someone from Activision to burst in the door and say, wait a minute, you want us to create how many millions of toys for this game? I mean, before we even had our green light meeting, there were the logistics involved of creating something that had never been created at this scale before, at least not for video games. The tech involved and all of this, I promise you, those of us in design land were seriously like, the toy element of this may very well go away because we can't imagine that Activision's going to say, we're going to branch out into this thing that we've never branched out before, with the exception of what they learned from Guitar Hero. So
ironic, because even though the name of the studio was Toys for Bob, we had no experience with toys.
Yeah.
That's
And
true.
so, yeah, even that sense of, it wasn't until we started doing the prototypes, and I'm sure, Paul Ritchie has mentioned this before. It's like when the prototypes of the toys that they would make by hand would go down to be part of these show off production meetings to the people at Activision, and they would come out of the meeting and not have any toys with them because the executives were like taking them home to be with their kids. And so you knew that we were onto something. You knew that there was something about these toys and what they represented that was really resonating with fans of all ages.
Honestly, to touch on that toy thing, at the start of Skylanders, it was so much harder to have example toys. They had to be all hand sculpted, hand painted. They were all made of like clay. We'd hire additional companies to take the ones that the team had made and then try and like replicate them. It wasn't until, honestly, like the second or third game that 3D printing even became a thing. And that's what, increased the team's ability to get even more creative with the posing, with the appearance of these characters as physical objects, because they could iterate. They could come up with these ideas, try it out, go, ooh, no, that won't work, and then try again. Versus before, we had to be hand whittling things to make sure they work and then sticking with it.
Yeah, and just some statistics. Over the course of the 6 years that Skylanders was being made, over $3 billion in sales, making it, for 3 years in a row, the best-selling toy line, outselling Beyblade and Transformers. And if you factor in the toys as downloadable content, makes Skylanders as a franchise the 11th best-selling video game franchise of all time. That's pretty powerful.
Crazy.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, you definitely hit on something pretty cool there.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move into some more general questions that anyone can answer.
Okay. What was the best part about working on the Skylanders team?
I think you said it. It's the Skylanders team. Honestly, it was and continues to be for me a complete joy to work with a whole bunch of really weird creative people who come to work every day with new ideas and new and unique perspectives. I always joked that whenever I would go and visit Toys for Bob when I didn't work there, that it was kind of like going to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's a little bit dangerous. Kids might fall in the chocolate river, but it had a lot of whimsy, a lot of creativity, and a lot of really cool stuff. And I think that came directly from the people who've worked on this franchise.
In a purely materialistic sense, one of the coolest things about working on the Skylanders team was that we used these little chips to test out characters and play the game throughout development. And then as soon as we shipped, huge shipments of toys would come to the studio. And there was toy gifting day where the studio would give all the Skylander figures to the team members. And we got to put them on our desks and tear into them, give them to our kids. It was a cool perk.
My attic was never the same. Yeah, for me, it was always just the people. The animation team at Toys for Bob had been intact for a very long time. I was still one of the newest animators on the team 8 years into my career working at Toys for Bob. And as we progressed and we became bigger in cinematics, we'd bring people in, we'd have contractors and interns and junior animators and things like that. And people came and went, but still there's a kinship that's never really gone away. We have animators that work at Pixar now. We have layout artists that work for Disney. Like just seeing what we were able to take people who got their start at Toys for Bob or who were early in their career at Toys for Bob and then moved on to just amazing things. It reminds me a lot of the stories that Paul and Fred used to tell about the people they worked with at the start of working on Star Control and things like that they worked on ages ago, things that I grew up playing. And
ages ago.
Sorry.
So
No. So I did bring my Star Control code wheel to my job interview, I will say, from when I was a kid. I don't know if that's how I got the job or not, but it's the people, and regardless of where they are now, or if they've moved on, or if they're still here, that team made you feel like you could do anything, especially when you would sit during the day and look at what you were making and go, this is insane. This is never going to work. Then you've got, Robert over there clamming together pieces of toilets to make portals and E-Ways sculpting toys out of clay. It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But
I still remember sitting there one day going, is the lava barf coming out of the mouth of Eruptor too much? Is it too little? And I sat back and went, I'm spending my day at work talking about creatures barfing. This is delightful.
Well, and those were fun too, because in the later games, the animators actually got to pose some of the toys. So the reissues of the old toys, they were like, well, what pose should they be in? So instead of animating, we were designing toy poses, which I've never done before or done since. It's just amazing to see, like, I came up with this. I don't think I did Lava Barf, but I did something where we added like little bits of water under Gilgrunt or something like that. And he was floating through the air. And we're looking at this thing, or the girl with the skulls. Hex. Yeah.
Very
So I
nice.
came up with the idea of the skulls spinning the body, and it was like, how are we going to have floating skulls? But they came up with the little idea. They put them in plastic and made a swirl, and I was like, this is really cool. I could just pose toys all the time. That'd be fun. But yeah.
There's this thing
Very
that
nice.
happens to game development, and I don't care what game you talk about, making any game is super hard, and there's a lot of stress, some of it bordering on trauma, just hitting deadlines. I mean, that might sound a little exaggerated, but it's really not easy because there's a lot of, the company Activision was taking a big risk on the product and you want it to succeed, not only because you want the game to come out, but you want your career to continue in whatever you're doing. And so when you get to the end of it, having worked so hard with between 50 and 150 people, however many it was, you've kind of survived a lot of battles together, and then you get to savor the fan response together. And so over the years, you grow very close to the people that you're making the game with. We were lucky enough to make some games that a lot of people really loved, which I think made that sense of community within the studio even stronger.
Giving Vicarious Vision some love too.
Yeah,
Sadly, none of them were
shout
able
out
to
to
join
VV.
us.
They did incredible job on the games that they did. We actually worked closely with them throughout and even traded people back and forth. In a few cases, some people would leave VV to move out west, and we've had one or two people head back in the other direction. And Beanox 2 support studio, they did a bunch of great work as well. It takes
They made the 3DS games too, and they
Yep.
were awesome.
Yeah, which
And
were
the
totally
racing.
new. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
different. Yeah,
Yeah.
racing. And they actually VV in, I think it was Imaginators. We had outsourced to the fully rendered cinematics in all the Skylanders games over the years.
Right.
They were written internally. Activision helped out a little bit, but our team would frequently just advise. We didn't have a ton of control in the first couple of games. Imaginators was the first game where we exerted more control over those fully rendered cinematics. And instead of going with the people we usually had animate them, we went to VV and we directed them or worked with them as they did the FMVs for the Imaginators.
Yeah.
And it was really cool because they were able to you could see the difference between chaos and a fully rendered cinematic in the first game and what chaos looks like in the game. They're very different. And as a kid, you accept it. They sound the same. They look vaguely similar. But Imaginators was the first one where it was like consistently throughout, they looked like they should look. And that was because we were able to lean on VV to help us out there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I
Yes.
think it works a lot better when everything feels a little bit more cohesive in that way, because then it doesn't feel like you're leaving that world. So I think that definitely paid off.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for those aspiring to enter the video game industry?
Yes. Biggest thing that I can say, the video game industry is vast in the types of jobs that exist. Anything that you are good at, you could probably find a role for it in video games, which is what's so cool about it. From being great at business and math, you could actually join finance, but you're still working at a video game company, to creative writing. You could be a writer on video games, to being an artist, to being a sculptor, to being, someone with a great design mind. What's so cool with video games is that they're getting so large in a good way, but like inclusive in all of the different types of skill sets that are applicable. And so find the thing that you're passionate about, find the thing that you're good at, find the correlating job that exists in the video game industry and try and match that up.
I've got one, especially for aspiring game designers, and that's just to make your own games. The industry standard tools like Unreal Engine, not to plug them, but that's what we are using now. Anyone can use that tool for free and make his or her own game content. And you can also connect with people all over the world and make games with other people. Of course, it takes time and energy, but there's nothing cooler than when someone applies for a job and they can show off something that they made and talk about it. And it's incredibly instructive to make your own thing and realize what's hard about it. And that can also lead to what Lou was talking about. You can figure out, maybe I don't want to be a game programmer. Maybe I want to be a game artist or an animator.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, even using off-the-shelf games, retail games that have built-in level makers and things like that, just play around with it. The best part is when you're interviewing somebody who's come up with something that maybe just remixes 2 or 3 different points of some well-worn Mario Maker type thing. If you can get someone to say, I never thought about using this with this, and just get them guessing, that's a fabulous way to do it as well.
I think for me, it's iteration and collaboration works out a lot. Whether you're working on an idea or something like that, it's good to get constructive criticism, and it's good to keep elaborating and then ideas.
Yeah, and in animation, it really is just work on your craft, animate as many different types of characters as you can, learn as much as you can about gameplay animation. It does differ from film animation, but there are a lot of skills that are carried over from one to the other. But yeah, if you're looking at getting into games, make sure you've got game stuff on your reels and you've really thought about how assets are connected to each other and how things link up in games so you can make motions feel natural, artistic, or whatever it is you're after. Games require a certain level of foresight and connectivity that most types of animation don't. So it's a challenge, but it's worthwhile.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, are there currently any plans for a future entry in the Skylanders franchise?
We have to ask. We're sorry.
No additional news to share at this time.
I would still say that there's a ton of enthusiasm for the property within the virtual walls of PFB. We would not oppose it.
But I will be the hard and fast PR man. There is no news, anything to discuss at this time. We are here to talk about our love for the 10th anniversary of this wonderful franchise.
Great. All right.
Okay. As the first 10 years draw to a close, if you could say one thing to the fans, how you feel about the franchise and the community surrounding it, what would it be?
The obvious thing is thank you.
Thank you.
I think all of us, our careers are so much better and so much more interesting having Skylanders in them and having a tremendous amount of fans who have shown love and have grown up with it or have found it later in life or just connected with it in some way. I can point to a million stories and a million things that make me love my job because of Skylanders. Thank you to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, being able to go to my nephew's Skylanders themed birthday party and
Yeah.
be like, suddenly the word gets out to this massive number of kids that I'm working on the game, and it's like a mad rush to go talk to me about it. Wearing this shirt and all of a sudden looking out of the corner of my eye, and there's a group of kids that are like looking and they're whispering among themselves within hushed tones because somehow I represent something of what they grew up with. It's an incredible honor to be part of this franchise, to be able to bring that bit of connection and nostalgia and real positive feelings that so many kids have had. It's an amazing experience, and we're lucky.
Yeah, right. It just the way you were able to take in how people were experiencing Skylanders. I mean, I've shipped quite a few games at this point. We all have, but I've never experienced anything quite like going to Target or Toys R Us after a Skylanders game came out, especially the first one. Because I tell you, I wasn't totally sold this was going to work until like the day it came out, and I went to Target. I'm like standing looking over the toy aisle or the video game aisle, watching kids with whoever did them at Activision did an amazing job. These glossy glass, you could see the toys, you could see the portal. It was like everything elemental about what we were trying to do was presented in this little kiosk. It was brilliant. And you could just watch the kids go, take a box, put it on the thing, and just light up.
Yeah.
And it was like they lit up, I lit up. This fully grown man standing in Target staring at a bunch of kids playing video games. It's just like I just had this, like my cheeks hurt. I was smiling so hard when I got home, and going to Toys R Us and just seeing this wall of Skylander stuff. I've never experienced anything else quite like it.
Shout out to Kelly Pat and her team of awesome marketing folks for the kiosks.
Yeah, they were amazing. Like if I had to think of it, I would have been in my head that they nailed it 100%.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very on point marketing. You walk in and it's like you've entered a theme park. It has that exact same kind of feel to it, and it definitely captures that.
Well, now you've gone and done it. That's our actual Skylanders news. We're actually going to start a theme park someday.
In Ray's backyard.
In my
Made out
backyard.
of balsa wood and not up to the code. I'm sorry.
Sign a waiver. All the waivers. I was at a birthday party not 2 months ago, and a kid heard I worked on Skylanders and came up to talk to me. He was very excited. He told me about all the toys he was finding at their stores and whatever else. And it was just like, this is really cool, but this is still a thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just really happy that people can appreciate the love and craftsmanship and magic that went into the whole product. I guess I should do a shout out for the level artists. On the earlier Skylanders, we had to bake our lighting. So all that stuff is vertex lit and vertex baked. So that's why you get that very soft thing. And we made the decision midway through that we weren't going to do shadows baked on the textures. We actually cut out polygonal shadows because we felt like it really sold the look of this bespoke and toy-like world. And that was a lot of effort, but I think the end product was well worth it, as long as Andy didn't put the camera too close and broke the magic of using polygons.
That's why I'm here. I still do that. Every game
Still
I'm in.
breaks the camera.
Yeah. Breaking the camera is my job, and getting too close to grass textures.
Yes.
Is
Oh
really,
my gosh. Yeah. So
really
we had
what I'm after.
grass tech that would stack
Sort
on
of.
top of each other, and he would just pull it up the camera.
No, you always look under the grass.
I gotta say, you said magic. That leads me to a real quick story. For the first couple of years, the technology of what was powering a Skylander on a portal was so new and not seen in video games at the time. And working with PR, they didn't want us to say anything. They wanted it to be magic. We didn't want to break the illusion.
It was magic.
And the most irritated I have ever seen people asking me, okay, but how's it work? And I'm like, well, it's magic. It's a Skylander. He's frozen in real life and he's coming alive on the portal and he's there. And like, no. But like, what's in him? Magic? No, you need to tell me. And I was just like, people would just get really irate. And the fact that we wanted to preserve this joyful magic to it, it was just something that I remember being kind of wowed by at the beginning, because it honestly felt like magic, which is I think what led to a lot of the success and the connection with kids.
I will say that a lot of fans regard Skylanders magic as being somewhat equivalent to, say, Disney magic.
Yeah,
That's
it really
a
hits it.
compliment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think even in the level art, we always tried to have the levels kind of feel like a theme ride, and Andy, to his point, like made story beats hit certain things, so you'd hit a certain cadence to the level.
Yeah, even like the flyovers for the levels, especially in like Spyro's Adventure, really give you that theme park kind of feel to them, I think. So
A lot of those were due to the relative tech we had available at the time, and I always called them reverse golf games, because it was like a Tiger Woods golf game in reverse, because the camera tended to start at the end. You couldn't look at the levels the other way because they were arted two camera. The camera was primarily fixed. It had a little bit of fudge left and right, but you couldn't like take a level, turn the camera and look back. And if I ever did that, Daniel would come to my desk. And along with the rest of the art
that
team.
wall.
Yeah. There's no textures on the back.
It's like where they would film a Wild West movie and it was all facades.
Yes. So I looked at that problem and said, what can I do to show off this level? And it was like, there was literally probably one solution. So I'd either do one of those long camera pullbacks or a couple vignette shots along the level to get back to the start point. And yeah, again, the other thing that was interesting about this game is the Skylanders, you never know what character is going to be played at a particular time. So the Skylanders can't really act. We couldn't do lines and record every single Skylander because they all worked in every game, delivering a line at the beginning of the level. So it was one of the only games I've ever worked on where it was like, it was more about the art and what the level looked like and the enemies in some cases than it was ever about the playable characters. And that's also why we had things like Flynn and Callie and our NPCs running you through, because you could always count on them to hit their mark. Whereas if you go back and watch the old cinematics of some of the Skylanders, when we did move them around during cinematics, sometimes they skate a little, sometimes they don't walk, sometimes they run, but their feet slide. It's just the fact that they all move different speeds. And we don't have the ability to say, for this one of 300 playable characters, move this fast, you know, like you got to hit your timing. Yeah, a lot of the, especially early, a lot of what you see is a result of the limitations that were put on us and our creative solutions and how to get around those limitations. And I think it just resulted in some of the most fun art we could have come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it paid off. You worked on a franchise that I think is going to stay in the hearts and minds of people for a very long time.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for, leading all the fans to continue to talk about and enjoy and look back on the games.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It really is. So thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedules to be able to just talk about Skylanders and to celebrate the 10-year anniversary with us.
Thank you so much for
More
the
than happy
opportunity
to
do so. Yeah.
So much.
Thank you so much.
This segment might be over, but don't touch that dial, baby. Stay tuned for another segment of the Skylanders 10th anniversary celebration. Until then, this is Chill Bill signing off.
Paul Ritchie was telling us, Ray, that you used to be on the forums a lot for the Skylander stuff.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Secret.
This is master of misinformation, Paul Ritchie.
And then we have social media influencer Lou Studdert as
Oh,
well.
God.
Welcome.
That's a title.